Conference, brothers, sisters, I don't think we should have any qualms about using such old-fashioned words, because we're quite an old movement. Since industry began, groups of people have combined together to protect themselves and the communities from the damage caused by work. Groups have organised, lobbied, protested and taken direct action against the harm that capitalism causes to the people who make its profits. Way back in 1802, children didn't get the maximum 12-hour day because the mill owners felt sorry for them. In fact, at the time, the employers and their apologists argued that a 12-hour day would be bad for them. What would they do with all that free time? Might even corrupt their morals. And anyway, surely restricted child labour would place an intolerable burden upon business. Child labour was eventually abolished altogether in the UK in 1973. And that was because successive generations of workers, trade union activists and campaigners fought against it. The 8-hour day wasn't granted by benevolent capitalists who just didn't know what to do with all their money. It was won by workers organising direct action, industrial action, in the face of concerted opposition. The media and the employers of the time tried to portray them as lazy, worrying about nothing. And anyway, if work is good for you, shouldn't they want more of it? We should remember that early attempts to secure an 8-hour day failed in the face of this opposition. But they persevered and they won in many areas. Many of those involved in that struggle were not fee-paying union members, but they did subscribe to the idea. Action was more often than not wildcat, unofficial, the type that the modern union official is duty-bound to discourage. We didn't get the 74 Act because the bosses said, OK, enough is enough, it's time we stopped killing so many people. We got it because we had a mass union movement at the height of its powers. And we, comrades, are the direct descendants of that line. And I hope that we are comrades, not colleagues. Colleagues are the people who you work with. Comrades are the people you fight with. And the Hazards Charter is our list of demands, the modern day standards that we are fighting for. When I was asked to speak about the Charter, I decided to look back at previous demands to see what we'd gained. The first Charter, way back in 1987, called for a Freedom of Information Act, the right to refuse dangerous work and know what we are working with, regular paid leave for safety rep training. Now, we haven't won them totally, but many we have won in part and to continue to struggle to improve. It also called for a Corporate Manslaughter Act, which somebody told me yesterday was a zany idea in the 1980s. In the 90s, we called for a total ban on asbestos, protection for whistleblowers, implementation of the Working Time Directive. Many of these things have been, at least in part, achieved. And they've been achieved in a remarkably short period of time under both Labour and Tory governments. They've been achieved by you. They've been achieved by our trade union movement, some helpful politicians, and the Hazards campaign. Many of the demands that the Charter makes have yet to be achieved. We still want our roving reps, the right to stop the job, the HSE to enforce current legislation, for stress to be treated like any other industrial injury, and for national recognition of Workers' Memorial Day. The fact that these things are ongoing shouldn't be a cause for dejection. We've only been at it 21 years. It took 220 to abolish child labour. When I read those old charters, I was struck by their combination of practical proposals and ambitious demands. So, we had detailed stipulations for applying the COSH regulations, next to calls on the government to resist attempts at blackmail from the World Trade Organization. I was also struck by how radical we were. In the 1980s, we were calling for workers to have the right to paid leave to attend trade union health and safety training. Not union reps, workers, the right to paid leave to union-organised health and safety training. We wanted the right to take health and safety inspectors to tribunal if they failed to enforce the law. We wanted a Working Environment Act that would force employers to pay for the worker-controlled occupational health services that we want. And I looked at our current charter, and it doesn't seem so radical. Hopefully, you are all familiar with it. Everybody get one of these in their packs? Most heads nodding. Good. Okay. Whether or not you've read this charter, you will be familiar with many of its aims, because they've become mainstream in the trade unions. And maybe that's why the charter doesn't feel so radical, because our once radical ideas have become acceptable. Personally, I think that this mainstreaming of hazards campaign demands within the labour movement is one of the great achievements of the hazards campaign over the last 21 years. The modern charter does contain the same mix of pragmatism and aspiration. So we do call for gender-sensitive health and safety. We still want road and safety reps and the right to stop the job. We want proper directors' duties, more resources for the HSE, worker-controlled occupational health centres, just and effective compensation, acknowledgement that road deaths are work-related, a total worldwide ban on asbestos, fighting against globalisation and the race to the bottom to minimum standards, environmental reps for every workplace, and that Workers' Memorial Day be acknowledged. Whenever somebody holds up a piece of paper, I think people think, I have in my hand a piece of paper. But this is not a surrender document, this is our battle cry. And what we ask is that we redouble our efforts to try and achieve these demands, to taking them back to the workplace and pinning them on the wall, getting those conversations going with your members again, which I'm sure many of you already do, taking them to branches and committees, and I think they have slipped a little down the union agenda. Maybe we have become a little complacent, maybe we need to push them back up again. But these demands themselves are not set in stone. They're always open to review, and we ask that you contribute your ideas for what the next charter will contain. What is it that your members will want? I, for one, as you may have gathered, think it's time we got a bit more radical again. I think it's time we start demanding work that is actually good for us, work that strengthens the body and nourishes the mind. What about demanding the 3-day week? What about demanding that the work that we do will not simultaneously threaten the future existence of our species? I can hear the cries already. We can't afford it. It's not reasonably practicable. Well, if they genuinely can't afford for us to have better lives and a future for the human race, then maybe their system is not for us. as we face these difficult times and inevitably get embroiled in the struggle just to defend what we have gained, maybe we also need to look above the trenches and think about how we want the future to be. Our forebears could only dream of what we now have. I think it's time for us to dream of what those who follow could have in the future. Thank you.